Andrei Nikolaevich Kuznetsov, senior sergeant of the 9th Company of the 345th Separate Airborne Regiment, was born in Novokybyshevsk, but spent his childhood and school years in Moscow, where he received his draft notice. Like many others, he was simply sent off to the army. None of his relatives knew at the time that the road would lead him to Afghanistan. His parents were probably among the last to find out about it. There is an interesting story connected with his first draft notice. Andrei's sister had a friend who worked at the military registration office. It was through her that it became known that the draft notice was for Fergana, and everyone understood at the time that this was a direct route to Afghanistan. His relatives submitted a request for a replacement, and Andrei was sent a little later to Lithuania, to Gazinai, where the airborne training school was located. But fate had other plans. After 6 months of training, he still ended up in Afghanistan. The Gazinai school was considered one of the most rigorous. It was here that paratroopers were trained for combat. The 3rd Battalion, to which Andrei was assigned, was intended for Afghanistan from the very beginning. Everyone knew this, so training was intense and took place under the most difficult conditions. While other units could afford to go to classes lightly equipped, the battalion always trained in full gear, body armor, helmets, weapons. The physical strain was enormous. At that time, there were only rumors about Afghanistan. There was practically no accurate information, but everyone understood that they were being prepared for war. Some wrote reports to get there voluntarily, consciously striving to go to Afghanistan. Andrei was sent because he refused to remain a sergeant at the training center. They wanted to keep him there as a junior commander, but he firmly said, "No, I'm going with my guys to Afghanistan." They told me straight out, "Well, if you don't want to stay, you'll go to Bagram." What difference does it make, I thought. But I understood the real difference once I got there. When I first arrived in Afghanistan, it was like stepping out of a fairy tale. Everything seemed unreal. People looked completely different, dressed in strange clothes. Everything was foreign and unfamiliar. I was particularly struck by the mountains. I had never really been in the mountains before, never run there, never lived in such conditions. Officially, we were given the standard explanation. These are the southern borders of our homeland, and we must stop drug trafficking. In reality, there were indeed huge quantities of drugs there, and weapons were flooding into Central Asia. And Western consultants, Americans, French, were working there, but this was not known from reports, but from veteran soldiers who had real combat experience. Our regiment was stationed just 300 or 400 meters from the local villages. And these villages were like something out of the Middle Ages. You walk in, and there is no furniture as we know it, no amenities. Only rugs, mats, and some modest necessities. And the question arises, how do they survive among the rocks and stones? Vegetable gardens are rare in the mountains. Almost nothing grows there. But poppy fields are easy to sow, and poppies can be used to make drugs. But, to be fair, many locals still try to grow at least something for themselves to feed themselves. At the same time, don't let your guard down. During the day, he may seem like an ordinary farmer in his garden, but in the evening, he may pull out a weapon. They have them in every house. And everyone knows how to use them, from gray-haired old men to young boys. Killing is not difficult for them. I saw it myself. During one sortie, a little boy attached a mine to the Ural truck our sappers were riding in. In the evening, the soldiers settled down nearby to rest. 8 of them lay down to sleep right next to the truck, and there was an explosion. After that explosion, we couldn't recover for a long time. We literally gathered the pieces of our 8 comrades all over the field. It's hard to believe, but the deadly trap was set by a little boy. The kind you would never think capable of such a thing. The children there were a special case. Many of them knew Russian very well. They were talkative, sociable, could easily strike up a conversation, smile, and a minute later ask for bakshish, bakshish. It was difficult to tell where simple childish spontaneity ended and cunning began, which sometimes cost us our lives. Cigarettes were a separate currency for the locals. You could find anything you wanted in every store. Filtered, menthol, any brand. They were happy to trade them, especially for our dry rations. In the army, we were given Pamir cigarettes, which were terrible and almost impossible to smoke. But sometimes, when you were in the mountains, when you hadn't slept or had any strength for several days, and there was nothing at all, it got to the point of absurdity. We rolled tea in newspaper and smoked it instead of tobacco. I arrived at the 345th Regiment on May 9th. Symbolically, a date I will remember for the rest of my life. We had barely been assigned to companies when, 2 weeks later, we were sent into combat. Before each sortie, we were given different tasks, but for some reason, it was always our 9th Company that ended up in the thick of the action. No wonder they thought it was some kind of curse. The neighboring 8th Company often complained. They said they were always getting hit, while we were left in cover. But as soon as we switched places, them forward, us backward, we were still the ones getting into firefights. It was as if fate was pursuing us. That was when I first realized that in Afghanistan, I was a complete zero. Everything I had been taught in training had to be rethought. Here, there were different rules, a different life, different burdens. Especially when you go into the mountains, it's not a forced march across the plains. You have 40 kilograms of equipment on your back, sometimes even more. And you yourself weigh just over 50. Try walking with that on slopes where every step is difficult. You always carry your combat load with you. 4 grenades, your personal supply, 2 flasks of water, only 2 liters, and that's your life. Plus an RDV, 12 liters of water for the whole platoon. Of course, one person carries it, but here you have to be careful who to trust. If you give it to someone weak, they may quietly pour out the water to lighten their load. And then, at the most crucial moment, when thirst is drying your throat, when the air is hot, and there is only stone and dust around, there will be no water at all. And in the mountains, that meant a death sentence. And if you can somehow endure without food, the body holds on, drawing on its internal reserves. Then without water, everything changes radically. I have seen people who, after several hours of thirst, ceased to be themselves. Their faces became distorted, and a wild emptiness appeared in their eyes. The person seemed to be the same, but you no longer recognized them, as if they were not your companion, but some kind of shadow. Some people held on, fought, and went to the end. Others broke down. They sat down on a rock or right on the ground, and that was it. No amount of shouting, threats, or even blows could get them up again. They seemed to switch off from life, and all that was left was to watch silently as they slowly gave up. At the same time, you could never guess in advance how someone would behave. There were thin, quiet guys who everyone considered weak links, but they, on the contrary, showed incredible tenacity. Take Melnikov, for example. In civilian life, he was calm, family-oriented. He had a wife and child. You couldn't get a word out of him. He was always modest and silent. No one would have thought that he would become an example of fortitude. But he stood his ground to the end, never retreating a single step. Even when he was seriously wounded, he didn't leave, he didn't give up. When he started to crawl away, blood came up his throat, and he simply fell silent forever. I can still see that image before my eyes. A quiet, unassuming guy who turned out to be stronger than many. Others, on the contrary, broke down where you least expected it. They seemed healthy, strong, pumped-up guys, but they came under the first barrage of fire, and that was it. I remember one officer. He had just arrived, young, strong, confident. And then the first volley of fire, bullets whistled over his head, and his heart seized up. His body couldn't take it, and a helicopter had to be called to evacuate him to the rear. For me, the first battle was a shock. Those whistling bullets, in movies it sounds like a special effect, but in reality they whistle too, and at first it even seems melodic. I rushed forward with my heavy backpack, thinking, I'll run 20 meters to the boulder, lie down there and take cover. It felt like I was flying, like the wind was blowing me, my legs carrying me. But then the guys told me that I was actually barely crawling, dragging myself more than running. And if it hadn't been for a veteran soldier who caught up with me in 2 jumps, knocked me to the ground and yelled, "Stay down, don't stick your head out." But all talk of heroism ends the moment you see a fallen comrade for the first time. Then you realize that this is not a movie, and there is no romance here. The sounds of battle no longer seem melodic, as they did in the first few minutes. Everything changes in your head in an instant. A cold realization sets in: you are at war, and death is near. And the hardest thing is not only the loss of a friend, but also the need to carry his body on your back. 20 kilometers through the mountains, under the scorching sun, with weapons, ammunition, and the dead man's load. It weighs so heavily on the psyche that many break down completely. When you return from such combat missions, you can see that some of the guys can't take it anymore. They were removed from combat units and transferred to the rear, to bakeries, boiler rooms, and support units, just so they wouldn't have to go back into the mountains. For them, the war ended prematurely. Those who remained were hardened, and it was already clear that they would go to the end because there was no turning back. We covered the 45th Sapper Regiment, which was clearing the road to Costa. We sat on assignments for a month while they did their work, and we provided them with security. Then the main regiment approached us, and we joined it. So we ended up on the same height, convenient for observation and correction. From there, we could see the road along which supplies and traffic were moving. There were 39 of us at the time. The Alikali area is where the Mujahideen were trained, right on the border with Pakistan. There was a training base there, and that's where I first saw truly trained mercenaries. All dressed in black, coordinated, skilled fighters. It was immediately clear that they had undergone serious training. Our reconnaissance company was ambushed by them. They took out 6 of our guys in literally a few seconds. They hit them point blank with a grenade launcher. We went to rescue the reconnaissance team. We took heavy casualties then. Our first real losses occurred in that battle. Before that, even though we were at a high altitude and under constant fire, we had gotten used to it, to the mortars, to the rockets. Everything was on schedule. You woke up, had time for a quick bite to eat, and then the shelling started, as if someone had set a timer. You sit there, hiding behind rocks, waiting for the shelling to end. Then everything calms down, and it seems like life is returning to normal. In response, of course, we call in artillery, adjust our fire, do something. That's how the day goes. You've been under fire, but everyone is alive and well, and it seems like nothing terrible has happened. We were taken down from the heights on New Year's Eve. The regiment commander made the decision to replace the 9th Company with a reconnaissance company. It turned out that we ended up down below just before the battle. We descended in armored vehicles, reached the bathhouse, and finally washed ourselves. We celebrated New Year's in royal style, so to speak, compared to what usually happens on the front lines. We sat, celebrated, laughed. For a few hours, it was possible to believe that there was no war. But the joy was short-lived. At 5 in the morning, we were woken up again and sent back to that very hill. It was as if the holiday had never happened. A week later, around Christmas, something began that everyone would remember for a long time. From the morning, everything went differently than usual. Usually, according to the schedule, you get up, they give you time to eat breakfast in peace, and you have a little time to spare. But here, as soon as we were about to sit down to eat, the shelling began. Rocket shells, mines, all at once. We had Igor Tikhon, nicknamed Elephant, or War Elephant. He was a healthy, strong guy, a real warrior. When the shelling intensified, we hid in a small house where our belongings, ammunition, and everything we needed were stored. But the shelter quickly turned into a trap. The second volley hit so hard that the exit was under fire. It was impossible to get out through it. It was deadly dangerous. Then our elephant didn't lose his head. He ran up and literally broke through the wall of the hut. One by one, we jumped out through the opening that had been created, saving ourselves. Thanks to him, many survived that day. But there were casualties. It was on that day that we lost our first soldier. The spotter was killed by a rocket-propelled grenade. His comrades, Svetkov and Alexandrov, picked up his body to carry it away. As they carried him in their arms, they talked about how they were going to go somewhere together after demobilization, making plans. But fate decided otherwise. Both of them soon died on the same hill. Slavka Alexandrov had recently, just a week or two before the battle, celebrated his 20th birthday. We threw him a small party right at the position. We made a cake out of whatever we had on hand: condensed milk, crushed crackers, and we somehow managed to write the number 20 on top. We sat in the evening, laughing and joking. I said to him then, "Imagine telling people back home that you celebrated your 20th birthday not at home, but under fire from rocket launchers and mortars. No one will believe you." He just smiled in response. And in the evening of that very day, as the sun was setting, the enemy launched an attack. Their signal was a grenade launcher shot. As soon as the loud bang sounded, it became clear that it was beginning. Slavka was the first to notice them. He opened fire with his Utes machine gun, and it was his machine gun fire that stopped the first wave of attackers. But the enemy immediately concentrated all their fire on this machine gun. Slavka took the brunt of the attack and was killed, but it was his determination that gave us the opportunity to gain a foothold and organize our defense. The main problem was that help could not arrive quickly. The height was remote, the terrain rocky, and it was difficult to get there. Therefore, we had to hold out on our own. The first few minutes were especially terrifying. You shoot accurately, you see the bullets hitting the enemy, but he still keeps moving forward. It feels like they don't feel any pain, as if they're under some kind of spell. They keep going until their bodies completely give out. Only when several bullets hit him in a row did he finally fall. Only then did it become clear that we could catch our breath. This continued throughout the night. By dawn, we had repelled 12 attacks. Wave after wave, and each time it was the same. They rolled in, we fought them off, then there was a short respite of 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes a little longer. And then again the screams, the shots, the bursts of fire. The strongest blow fell in the direction where Volodya Shigalov and Sergei Borisov were holding the defense. The enemy was particularly fierce there. They had the most wounded and killed. The guys said, "We have almost no one left. If there's another attack, you and your machine gun come over to us and help hold the sector." But Andrei Tsvetkov just shook his head. "I won't give up my machine gun. I'll go there myself." Tsvetkov also died in the final attack. He was literally pelted with grenades. Even as shrapnel tore through the air around him, he continued to fire his machine gun, rushing toward his death. It was a terrible sight for all of us, heroism and tragedy in a single moment. The hardest part of the whole battle was not only fighting off the attackers, but also watching our comrades die. Several times I went behind the boulder where we had laid the dead and seriously wounded. Before my eyes was a guy with his insides torn out, screaming, calling out, begging for help, and you realize there's nothing you can do. If he had been evacuated in time, he might have survived, but here it was impossible. 2 or 3 hours, and that was it, the end. And at moments like that, it became especially hard on the soul. You're there, you hear his cries, you see his eyes, but you can't do anything except continue to defend and hold this damn hill. The attacks followed one after another, and it became clear that there were more dead and wounded than there were people capable of carrying them out. Physically, it was impossible. There was only one choice left: either abandon our comrades and leave, or stand our ground to the end. But how could we leave our own behind? It became clear to all of us. We would either hold this line or die here. We understood that help would come, but when? No one knew. Meanwhile, the enemy pressed harder and harder, pushing us back step by step. We were retreating meter by meter, and now they were only 10 to 20 meters away from us. We were running out of ammunition and strength, and it seemed that we were about to be crushed completely. And then, as if out of nowhere, our reconnaissance platoon appeared. They began to make noise from afar, shouting and shooting, creating the illusion that large reinforcements were about to arrive. It worked. The militants realized that even if they crushed us now, they would have to fight new forces later. They decided to launch a final fierce attack to retrieve their dead and wounded. After that, the fighting stopped. At dawn, a strange, deathly silence fell. Not a single shot, not a single shout. It was as if the mountain itself had died. Apparently, the enemy's strength had also come to an end, and they realized that they would not be able to take this height. 6 of our men were killed instantly, many were seriously wounded, some had their legs or arms amputated. We never saw some of them again. By morning, only 8 to 10 of us remained, from the entire unit. It took me a long time to recover after that battle. At the base, we did everything as we were supposed to, drill, maintenance work, but it was all done automatically, as if I were a robot without feelings. Inside, there was emptiness, and for several months I lived in a kind of prostration. When we returned, a correspondent came to visit us, I think from Krasnaya Zvezda. I don't remember his last name. He was filming a movie about Afghanistan and decided to take a group photo. Our entire company sat on an armored personnel carrier with the regiment commander. To make the shot look more lively, he started telling us jokes and trying to get us to smile. But none of us reacted. Everyone's faces were stony, gloomy, as if frozen. Then, almost jokingly, he said, "Why are you all so sour? Smile a little." And at that very moment, literally 20 meters away from us, a landmine detonated. The correspondent and his assistant fell into the dust and, looking around in a daze, crawled away. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, we burst out laughing. That's how a peculiar sense of humor manifested itself in those conditions. Laughter against the backdrop of constant death and danger. Life was hard. You came back from combat torn, dirty, and lice-ridden. The first thing you did was wash and shave, and then the most precious thing awaited you, a stack of letters. They were a real breath of fresh air. You read each letter several times, trying to remember every line, every piece of news. And if there was time and opportunity, you wrote a reply. Letters from home were like a ray of warmth, a reminder that somewhere normal life was going on, a completely different life, peaceful, civilian. And we were cut off from all that, in the trenches and mountains. Paradoxically, you get used to it quickly. I even developed a strange dependence. After combat missions, when you return to base, 3 days pass and you start to feel restless, as if something is missing. You are drawn back to the mountains, to battle. I wrote to my loved ones until the very end that I was in the GDR. I had a friend who was actually serving there, and we corresponded. Looking at his letters, I copied his style. I described the weather, the routine, life. I wrote the same thing to my family, just so they wouldn't know the truth. But soon the deception was revealed. My sister was the first to guess. She had a boyfriend who had also been to Afghanistan. When he saw my letter sent by field mail, he immediately said, "Don't believe it, he's in Afghanistan." I was most worried not even for myself, but for my parents. I was afraid that they would receive a funeral notice. After the events at the height, it was indeed sent, and only by a lucky coincidence did it not reach the family. Thank God someone intercepted it in time, either at the military registration office or back in Tashkent, and sorted out the confusion. The thing is, I was at the top, Kuznetsov Andrei Nikolaevich, and another Kuznetsov was fighting with us, Oleg, also Nikolaevich. He was assigned to our unit, and he was the one who died in that battle. But when the message came, it simply said, Kuznetsov, 9th Company. And I was the only one in our company with that surname. Can you imagine what that would have been like for his parents? That's why I was terrified until the very last moment that they might have given them that paper. In fact, I returned alive and was demobilized on January 2, 1989. The Union still existed then, but it was no longer the Union I had left to join the Army. No work, no stability. I had left as a young man, an 18-year-old kid who had just graduated from technical school, with a naive outlook on life. I returned a different person, hardened, with inner strength, with experience that forever defined my attitude toward everything that was happening. I understood a simple truth. There are no trifles in life, every decision has a price. Many people had injuries or concussions. But in those years, at the age of 18, no one was particularly eager to make such things official. And the doctors said bluntly, if they record a concussion in your documents, you won't be able to find a job later. Therefore, people tried to avoid hospitals. You would rest in your first aid station and then return to duty. After that height, I had a concussion, so severe that I completely lost my vision for a while. Just in an instant, everything went dark before my eyes, as if someone had turned off the light. I lay in my company, not even bothering to go anywhere higher up. I spent the day in fear. I thought that if my vision didn't return, then I would have to give in to the doctors. After the concussion, I rested, and my vision gradually began to return. At first, everything was black and white, and I was already happy. I thought, well, I can live with that. And then, after a while, the colors reappeared. When I arrived at the military registration and enlistment office, they greeted me with bewilderment. They looked at me and said, "Where did you come from on January 2nd? Who are you? Where have you been all this time?" I tried to explain something, but I could see that they didn't understand and didn't really want to listen. By then, a Congress had already been held in the country, where it was openly acknowledged that the Afghan war was a mistake, that we shouldn't have been there, that it was the wrong war. And the attitude was immediately apparent: "We didn't send you there." After that, no one said anything out loud, they just pretended that it was the way it should be. And we, the Afghans, had to stick together. We tried to help as best we could. We lived modestly, worked a little, but most importantly, we didn't lose touch with each other. Because many guys couldn't take it. Some started drinking themselves to death, some turned to drugs. Quite a few of my acquaintances ended up in prison. They couldn't return to normal life, couldn't fit into this world where everyone pretends that nothing happened. I made a firm decision for myself. I'd had enough of war. I'd had my fill there. And when some of my colleagues later rushed off to Chechnya or other hotspots, I knew that for me, it was all behind me. I'd had enough. At the age of 20, I returned home with a medal, and that meant a lot. I remember once, on August 2nd, Airborne Forces Day, I went out in my uniform and wore my medal. And I immediately noticed how people were looking at me, like, "Who is this kid with a medal? Where did he get it?" I felt those looks on me, and it made me uncomfortable. After that, I never wore the medal again. Why? Those who know understand everything without words. When we met with each other, former colleagues, everything fell into place. No one needed to explain anything there. We sat down, talked, reminisced, shared. And in those moments, we became real psychologists for each other. Every year, on February 11th, we gather at the Bolshoi Theater. This is a special day for us, the date our regiment withdrew from Afghanistan. Guys come from all over, some from different parts of Russia, some from Ukraine, some from other former Soviet republics. It has become a tradition for us, a meeting that takes us back to those years and reminds us of those who are no longer with us. In 2012, my comrades and I, with whom I served, decided to go and install a memorial plaque at the very place where the battle took place at high altitude. Initially, we planned to climb right to the top, but this proved impossible. American troops were already stationed there, and they asked for an incredible amount of money, $50,000, for escorting us. Of course, we didn't have that kind of money. Then we found a way out. For only $200, we hired 2 cars, drove to a pass near the hill ourselves, and attached the plaque to a rock. The weather was harsh, it was snowing, and suddenly people emerged from the snowy curtain, dressed just like the mujahideen of those years, with weapons and grenade launchers. At that moment, my heart stopped. We were unarmed, completely empty-handed. But instead of hostility, something unexpected happened. They calmly asked what we were doing. The locals translated our words. We explained our purpose, and they not only allowed us to put up a plaque, but even gave us their weapons so that we could fire a salute, a military sign of remembrance. After that, we returned their weapons and drove back. It felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from our shoulders, as if we had fulfilled an important duty. Moreover, our conversation with them showed that they treated us with respect. Not as enemies, but as soldiers with whom they once had to fight, but who did so honestly. And this is perhaps the most valuable thing, the understanding that even on the other side of the front line, there is still respect between soldiers. My fellow soldier, Iskander Galiyev, was acquainted with Fyodor Bondarchuk. When he was thinking of making a big movie about the war, Iskander suggested that he base it on the story of the 9th Company and that very battle. That's how the script came about. We collected the memories of our guys, every soldier who served at that time. The result was the film 9th Company. Of course, opinions differ. Some say there is not enough truth, others say there is too much. But the main thing is that the film played its role. After it was released, a great wave of discussion began. People started talking about our war, and the authorities paid more attention to Afghans and our organizations. They began to provide more trips to sanatoriums, especially for disabled people, and more real help appeared. The most important thing is that we have at least come closer to a common understanding of what the Afghan war was. For a long time, it was considered wrong, labeled, and even now there is no final conclusion to this story. But knowing all this, I have no doubt, if fate gave me the choice again, I would go there again. Of course, I would like to go through all this without losing my close comrades. But the service itself, the experience itself, has become an integral part of my life, and I cannot imagine any other path.